So Uncharted 2. It was a fantastic game that was better than the first one in pretty much every single way. The story was more complex, the gameplay was more varied, and Tenzin. After Uncharted 2 was released, development immediately began for the third game. Not only that, but it turns out that at this point, Naughty Dog had split into two teams. One worked on Uncharted 3, while the other worked on a new franchise that took place in a post-apocalyptic setting, which we now know as The Last of Us. What's so impressive is the fact that these games still came out as well as they did, considering they were both done by half the usual amount of people. Now I'm just going to go ahead and say that this review will be much shorter than most of my others, because I really don't have that much to say about this game. Uncharted 2 changed up its formula a lot to create an all-around better experience than Uncharted 1. Uncharted 3, on the other hand, is a perfect example of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Because of that, most of the things I would say about this game are things I already said in my Uncharted 2 review, so I don't want to spend too much time repeating myself here. As you'd expect at this point from Naughty Dog, this game looks great. The environments look even better than the last game, with the desert areas being the most noteworthy. The developers actually decided to make desert environments to challenge themselves, as making things like sand and snow look realistic isn't exactly easy to do. Before I talk about the few things that I feel have actually been added or improved with this game, let's talk about the story. So the story in Uncharted 3 tries to take a more serious route this time around. Don't get me wrong, the characters still have some funny lines throughout, just not as often. They attempt to give us some backstory for Nate and Sully, and I love what we got, they just never really go anywhere with it. The only flashback is shown towards the beginning of the game, which shows us how these two came into each other's lives, but never anything beyond that. It's especially weird to see now after playing Uncharted 4, which kinda seems to replace this backstory with a new one. The story also seems to be split into two different sections. There's the first half where you're with Sully, Cutter, and Chloe, then there's the second half where you're with Sully and Elena. There's also Salim, who's obviously trying to recreate the magic of Tenzin, but it's not gonna work, do not even try. Nah, I'm kidding. Salim's pretty cool too. The one thing I feel this story does have over the others, though, is that it feels more personal to Nathan Drake. This just makes it feel like you have more of a reason to be doing what you're doing throughout the gameplay, rather than just feeling like a murderous lunatic. The gameplay itself is essentially the same as what it was in the last game, but again, it was already pretty great the way it was. The one mechanic they did add was the ability to throw back grenades with a well-timed button press. This is extremely useful because the enemies in these games seem to have an unlimited supply of them. Not only that, but they also have godlike pitching arms, so every grenade lands right beside you, and it's nice to be able to throw it back at them. The puzzles in this game are far better than before. They're way more interesting and actually had you think on your own most of the time instead of always having to depend on the journal. The most noteworthy improvement in this game, though, is the design of the encounters. They are now much more open than before, which leaves you vulnerable to enemy attacks from all sides. The AI on the enemies is much more refined than before as well. They are incredibly aggressive and aren't afraid to come around your cover and blast your shit. The more open design of these encounters makes them some of the most memorable in the series for me. One of my favorites is the shipyard section you go to after being kidnapped by this pirate guy. It might just be my favorite combat section in the trilogy, honestly. When playing on crushing difficulty, this game is arguably the most challenging of the three, but don't worry, you're properly rewarded with some of these amazing character skins. I like the skins in the last two games, especially Donut Drake, but now there are so many more great skins than before. Along with Donut Drake, we have 5 new Donut skins, including Donut Sully and Lazarevich. Why did they not think of this earlier? You can also play as skeletal versions of ancient explorers like Marco Polo and Sir Francis Drake, but do not worry, I've saved the best for last. You can play as Tenzin. So what I'm going to do is take anything negative I have to say about this game and divide it by playable Tenzin. This cancels this, which leaves Uncharted 2 with a score of, let's see, 10 out of 10. In all seriousness, while that is truly the best thing we could have asked for in this game, it doesn't quite save the whole experience. Like I said earlier, the story seems to be very segmented, and the plot and characters never intertwine with each other the way they did in Uncharted 2. The whole ending section of this game kind of just feels like a reskinned version of Shambhala from the last game. What I mean by that is it follows the same exact structure where you find a lost city that contains a strange substance you need to keep from leaving it, which is then followed by a fake-out death, although this one actually was pretty convincing, which is cool. And then you leave the lost city as it falls to pieces and once again leaves you with nothing. You don't even get a cool boss fight to finish off the game either, but instead have another quick-time event fight like at the end of the first game. It's definitely not as annoying as the one in the first game, but it's just nothing interesting either. The villains also aren't as great this time around. They start out compelling enough, but both have disappointing endings that kind of waste their potential. They're still better than whatever his name was from Uncharted 1, but not quite as memorable as Lazarevich or Harry Flynn. I hate to end it on a low note, but that's really all I can say about this game without repeating myself from the last review. Keep in mind, most of the things that were great about Uncharted 2 are still great here, so this isn't a bad game. Far from it, actually. Uncharted 3, while nothing revolutionary, was yet another great installment in the series. It just had some slight issues that held it back from being as great as 2. I give Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception, an 8 out of 10. Just so you guys know, I'm going to be reviewing these games in release order, so next week will actually be The Last of Us and not Uncharted 4. So anyways, if y'all enjoyed this review, I ask that you please leave a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time when I review The Last of Us. Until then, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.